There are several ways of creating a conceptual mass form. One way is to go to the Insert tab and pick Load Family, and then scroll down to Mass folder and use some of the mass forms that come with Revit. If you use these families, you'll need to save them as a different name so that you can keep these defaults. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this dialog box. Another way of creating a mass is to go to the Massing and Site tab and use In-Place Mass. Right inside the Revit environment, you can create a mass form. There are some limitations to creating an in-place mass in the Revit environment. A third way is to go to the Application menu, the big R in the upper left corner, and go to New and down to Conceptual Mass, and use the family template file called Mass. Using this template, you'll have already in place work planes that you can use to develop your mass forms. And you can add parameters that you can modify and formulas that are attached to those parameters, and also save it as a separate file that can be used in other Revit projects. In this video, we'll be taking a look at using the tool called Create Form to create extrusions, blends, sweeps, revolves, and swept blends. So let's start by picking Model at the top left and using the Rectangle tool under Draw. We can draw a basic rectangular shape. Use your Escape key, select that rectangle, go to Create Form, Solid Form. Use these shape handle grips to modify the height, or you can use the temporary dimensions. Then pick in Space and select an edge using your Tab key to have a little more control over what you're selecting. Use these shape handles to modify the extrusion. Selecting a corner or an edge, we can then make this dimension permanent by selecting the small dimension icon, Escape, select that dimension, and drag your mouse out. With that dimension selected, we can go to Label in the Options bar, drop the list down where it says Label, and pick Add a Parameter. Make this parameter name Height, and then pick Instant. And because it's already defaulted as dimensions, we can go ahead and pick OK. And now, with it highlighted, you can go over to the Properties panel and select Family Types so that you can see that parameter that you created. To test it out, we can replace this value of the height with something like 60 feet and pick Apply and see that that corner will be modified. You can even add formulas to control more than one parameter. For instance, if you create a parameter for the width, you could make the width half the height by typing in here height divided by 2. Let's go ahead and pick OK. And now we want to save this family as a separate file. We can go to Save and then navigate to the folder that you'd like to use and call this Extrusion. And pick Save. Then pick Load into Project. In the 3D view, we can pick Place on Work Plane and then scroll back and you'll see your mass. Left click to place it in the Revit environment. Use your Escape key to end the command. Now when I select the mass, I can see in the properties, because I made it an instant property and not a type, there's the dimension height that I created as a parameter. I can change that to 40 feet and pick Apply and see that that corner is driven by a parameter. In the second video, we will turn this mass into a document by modeling faces onto the mass. Use Control Tab a couple of times to get back to the mass family. Save this file and start another new conceptual mass file using the mass family template. And let's save this one as a blend. You can create a blend from a couple of different profiles. We'll create different levels that we can draw our profiles on to create our blend. So select here level 1, hold your Control key and your Shift key down, hold your left mouse button down on the level, drag your mouse up and let go. And then we'll create a third level, hold Control Shift, hold your left mouse button down, pull your mouse up and let go. You can change the height between these levels by using the temporary dimensions. We'll select level 1 and create any one of the profiles. I'll go ahead and pick rectangle and then select level 2 and go to the top view and use the ellipse to create here an ellipse that's on the second level just above the rectangle. Using the view cube, we can go back to the edge of the view cube to come back to an isometric view. Select the level 3 and go to the top view and draw as a choice a circle. These can be any types of profiles that we like in this draw panel. Going back to the isometric view, we've got our profiles that we can use. We can now select all 3 of those profiles, pick Create Form and Solid Form to create our mass form based on a blend. We can then select surfaces and use shape handles to modify that mass form. Resting your pointer on one of the edges and using your Tab key until you see that the tooltip says Form and the whole thing is selected, you can left click to select the whole mass, pick X-ray so that you can see through here the form. Picking in space, you can now use your Tab key to select just the ellipse and maybe as an option use Rotate to slightly rotate this ellipse to modify the form. Using your Tab key again here to select the form, we can pick Add Profile to create additional profiles, giving us even more flexibility in creating our design. If you select the model and use Dissolve, the surfaces will be deleted and you can use the profiles to create a new form. Using the Blend tool, you can create several different profiles, rotate those profiles, and create interesting forms. I used just rectangles at different levels and rotated those rectangles. I could have also changed the rectangle dimensions. And over here, I used the spline through points to create different splines at the different levels, and then use Create Form to create the blend. It's recommended to create a family with just one mass model so that when it's brought into the Revit environment, you have more control over placement. Save this file and let's start a brand new conceptual mass using the mass family template and save this one as a sweep. We can then create a spline with through points, clicking points for that spline. It could be a line also. If you're creating a mass form that has a path and a profile that follows that path. I'm going to select one of these reference points and pick in the work plane panel set and then show. And what that does is it shows that reference plane. I can then pick the viewer and use the viewer to create my profile. Clicking in the work plane viewer, I can use the line tool to create my profile. As long as it's a closed loop, I can then close out of the viewer, select both the spline and the profile, pick Create Form, Solid Form. Save this file and create a new conceptual mass using the mass family template. Save this one as Revolve. When creating a mass form using Revolve, we need to draw an axis with an edge that will revolve around that axis. So we'll select here the vertical reference plane and then use a line to create the axis of rotation. Then use a spline to create the edge that will rotate around that axis. Select both the axis and the edge, select Create Form, Solid Form, and you have a choice now of creating just a surface or a rotation that goes all the way around 360. If you use your Tab key to select the mass, you can use X-ray and add an edge to create several edges, and then use those additional shape handles to modify the form. Save this file with the mass form that you created, and then start a brand new conceptual mass using the mass family template, and let's call this one Swept Blend, and pick Save. A swept blend is very similar to a sweep. The difference is that we can have several different profiles that will follow that path. So for this example, I'll select the level 1 plane and create the path with the straight line. And then use these point elements to create reference planes for my profiles. Select here one of those points and draw your first profile. I'm using a line with an arc, but you can see the possibilities for creating different forms. I can then select the second work plane reference point and create a different shape. Maybe this one uses a spline. And the third shape could be whatever shape I'd like. Here I'm only using these different shapes to show you the possibilities. I'm using lines for this profile, and then select both the path and the 3 profiles and pick Create Form, Solid Form. You can then select the mass, use X-ray, and add additional profiles to have more control over modifying your mass form. Now you have a choice of loading each one of these families into your Revit project, or what I'm going to do is close out of each one of these because I know that I've saved them, and then in the Revit file I'll go ahead and delete this one. You can go to Insert and Load Family and then navigate over to the folder that you use to save your mass forms. highlight those families by holding your Control key down and then pick Open. You can go to the project browser under Families and Mass and see all of your created forms. In the 3D view, you can drag and drop your forms into the Revit file, placing them on the work plane. If you have a mass form that isn't a solid shape, like this open surface, then Revit warns you to let you know that because it's only a surface, you won't be able to create mass floors, volume, and work with it as we will in the next video. But you can still apply a wall surface to it and use it in your design. I'll close out of this warning and drag and drop the other mass families onto the work plane.